Mark Calder, the newly appointed sales director, flung the contract across the table, paper skidding until it stopped against my notebook. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. Sign this contract, or don't come back Monday. The words were delivered casually, like a weather update, and that made them worse. No one in the office looked up. That silence wasn't respect. It was survival. That moment was cruel, like being submerged in a bucket of ice water. Speaking of which, I wonder what the temperature is where you live right now, and if you're still here. Please leave me your lucky number. Perhaps I need to introduce myself briefly. My name is Eden Brooks, Senior Operations and Systems Lead, the person who made the company's numbers behave. I didn't sell. I built the dashboards executives trusted, the workflows that prevented six-figure mistakes, the integrations that kept sales promises from collapsing into apologies. When systems worked, Mark took credit. When they failed, my phone rang. Mark had arrived with a grin and a vocabulary full of revenue. Anything that didn't invoice directly was overhead. Process was waste. Stability was optional. He loved to say speed mattered more than structure. Usually while reading reports generated by systems he didn't understand, the contract told the real story. Reduced benefits. My role stripped of protections. A neat deletion of post-merger equity participation. Nothing illegal, nothing loud. Just a quiet reclassification of my work as expendable. I didn't argue. I didn't remind him how often his forecasts leaned on my data. I didn't mention the nights I spent keeping launches from imploding. I didn't give him the satisfaction of resistance. I asked one careful question, measured and calm. Can I review the benefits section again? Mark smiled. It was the smile men wear when they think leverage has shifted. He nodded. Already bored. Already victorious. What he didn't see was that I had just chosen the timing, and that decision would quietly turn his ultimatum into the most expensive mistake of his career ever. After that moment, the real story begins. Special. Some of the following events are fictional and aided by AI for educational and storytelling purposes. I hope you enjoyed this part. If not, get some rest, stay healthy, and see you again later. Overnight, my calendar emptied. Strategy meetings disappeared. Access quietly changed. I was reassigned to operational assistance, which meant cleaning data, fixing broken handoffs, answering questions no one wanted to own. The irony was thick. The company celebrated growth while running entirely on systems I had built, tuned and stabilized. Every chart on the executive screen depended on pipelines I maintained. Yet my value was treated like a rounding error. I swallowed it, not because I agreed, but because pushing back would only feed the narrative that I was emotional, territorial, replaceable. Instead, I worked. I documented processes that had lived only in my head. I standardized permissions. I mapped dependencies. I wrote clean handover notes no one asked for. At night, I listened to an old piece of advice that resurfaced with new clarity. You get paid twice. Money now, leverage later. So I stopped learning for this company and started learning for myself. I studied vendor systems more deeply. I asked quiet questions. I built relationships that didn't route through Mark. I learned where the real switches were, not the visible ones. That's when it clicked. My power was never in staying. It was in leaving correctly. The exit process wasn't bureaucracy, it was a weapon. If you understood it, used properly, deliberately, I didn't refuse the new contract. I simply didn't sign it. That difference mattered more than Mark Calder realized. And I made sure every step stayed clean, polite, and painfully compliant. The morning after his ultimatum, I sent an email that could have come straight from an HR handbook. I asked about benefit transfers, role continuity, and how seniority would be calculated after the merger. No accusations, no emotion, just questions that required answers before an informed decision. I copied HR, thanked everyone for their time, and waited. Mark was busy chasing end-of-quarter glory. The merger clock was ticking, and he was obsessed with closing deals that would look good in the announcement deck. Paperwork bored him, process irritated him. My email sank beneath his inbox like a stone, exactly where I wanted it. While I waited, I worked. I showed up early. I delivered reports on time. I fixed issues before they escalated. I smiled in meetings I was still invited to, and nodded when Mark spoke about momentum. Nothing I did gave anyone a reason to question my commitment. That was important. Control depends on credibility. Behind the scenes, I prepared a handover so thorough it bordered on excessive. I updated documentation, standardized naming conventions, cleaned permission trees, and logged dependencies that only I had ever tracked. I organized access lists, mapped data flows, and wrote notes clear enough that anyone could follow them, assuming they understood the system. Most didn't. Days passed. Then weeks. HR followed up once. Mark waved it off. "I'll get to it," he said. Confident time belonged to him. That was the moment I circled the transfer date. On paper, it was just an administrative milestone. In reality, it was when accounts reset, leave balances recalculated, and responsibilities briefly floated between entities. The system was at its weakest then, reliant on continuity rather than authority. Time stopped being neutral. It started working for me. I stayed calm, answered questions slowly, and let silence do its work. Because deadlines pressure the careless, not the prepared ones like me. I had already chosen patience, fully. I didn't argue when Mark repeated the line. Almost bored with it now. "No contract by Friday, don't show up Monday." I looked at him, steady, and said the only answer he expected. "Understood." He nodded, satisfied, already moving on, convinced compliance meant surrender. Friday arrived quietly. I worked through the morning as if nothing were ending. Reports went out on schedule. Alerts were cleared. Questions were answered once. Precisely, without commentary. I avoided goodbyes because goodbyes invite suspicion. Control depends on normality. By mid-afternoon, I began the handover Mark assumed would never be needed. I transferred account ownership through proper channels. I sent IT a clean access list, clearly labeled, with notes explaining what each credential touched. Documentation folders were finalized and indexed. My phone was forwarded to Mark's desk extension. Not dramatically, just efficiently. Nothing disappeared, nothing broke. The systems kept running because I left them no excuse not to. At 4:45, when the office energy softened into weekend relief, I logged my final updates. I synced the shared drive, closed my laptop, and left it powered down. My badge went on top, aligned, not tossed. A small courtesy to the man who had demanded obedience instead of respect. I didn't announce my departure. I didn't send a farewell message. I followed instructions exactly as given. No contract, no Monday. The rules were his. After all, as I walked out, no one noticed. That was the point. The danger in my role had never been noise. It was continuity. Things worked because I was there, unseen, correcting small failures before they surfaced. Removing myself wasn't an act of anger. It was a procedure. By the time anyone thought to look for me, I would already be gone, leaving only a perfectly executed absence, the kind that takes time to understand and much longer to undo. It complied with policy, respected hierarchy, and exposed how fragile authority becomes when it rests on one person's quiet competence rather than shared understanding. Documentation, or respect, that realization would arrive too late. For him, not me, not even close. Enough. If you think following the rules exactly, handing everything over cleanly, and walking away without a scene was the right move. Leave a single dot in the comments your voice matters, because every quiet opinion helps shape what fair accountability really looks like. Monday morning arrived without urgency. I woke up early anyway, made coffee, and checked nothing. No alerts, no dashboards, no frantic messages. The silence felt earned. By 8, the company was already stumbling. Reports that usually refreshed automatically stalled. Numbers frozen midstream. Sales teams opened dashboards they relied on daily and found filters misaligned. Permissions missing. Charts unreadable, not broken, just unfamiliar. The kind of unfamiliar that slows confident people to a crawl. My phone buzzed while I was walking outside. A vendor contact, then another. I let both ring. They weren't emergencies yet. They were confusion. Confusion takes time to grow teeth. Inside the office. No one knew where to look. Sales couldn't access the datasets they expected. Managers asked junior analysts to fix things they didn't understand. IT checked logs and saw nothing wrong. Everything was functioning exactly as documented. HR noticed the problem next. My name still appeared as system owner in several places, but there was no signed transfer contract on file, no updated employment agreement, no formal termination either, just a gap that shouldn't exist and suddenly did. Mark filled that gap with phone calls. Missed call after missed call. Voicemail stacked up, each sharper than the last. At first he sounded annoyed, then confused, then angry. I didn't listen. I didn't need to. His tone was predictable. What surprised me was HR. They reached out politely, asking if I was available to discuss my contract status. That was when it became clear they didn't know about the ultimatum. To them, I hadn't walked out. I was simply unresolved. That realization settled in quietly. Mark had acted alone, outside process, assuming authority was enough. Now the company was stalling. Vendors were waiting. Sales was blind, and no one could officially say why. I stood in my kitchen, phone face down, and smiled. Not out of spite, out of satisfaction. I had followed every rule. I had handed everything over. I had done exactly what I was told. And somehow, nothing worked without me. That truth would become undeniable before lunchtime arrived for everyone involved. I received the call just after 9. Calm and professional. Eden. This is HR. Do you have a moment to talk? The tone mattered. It wasn't accusation. It was procedure. And procedure is where truth survives. I said yes and listened while she explained the concern. There was confusion around my employment status, system ownership, and the missing contract. Then she asked the question that shifted everything. Can you tell us what was said last Friday I didn't summarize? I quoted him. No contract by Friday, don't show up Monday. I repeated it exactly. The way it landed. The way it sounded in front of other people. Silence followed. Not the awkward kind. The kind where someone is checking policy in their head. She asked about equity. I told her the truth. I had none. No allocation, no documentation, no notice. Another pause. Longer this time. That's inconsistent with merger policy, she said carefully. She explained the requirement. To receive post-merger shares, employees had to transfer to the new entity and remain for 12 months. Support roles included. My role included. I let that sit between us before speaking again. That would require being offered shares. I said, I wasn't. The call changed tone. Notes were taken. Clarifying questions followed. Had anyone explained the exclusion? Had I signed anything waiving participation? The answer to all of it was no. Then she said the line that mattered. Mark never submitted a revision request, which meant something else entirely. He hadn't interpreted policy. He had bypassed it by the time we ended the call. The issue was no longer about my absence. It was about his authority. The merger benefits were now under review, and my name was suddenly central to a list that should never have been altered. Justice didn't arrive loudly. It arrived as an audit, and once audits start, they don't stop where managers hope they will. From that moment forward, every assumption he relied on began to crack under documentation, policy language, and the quiet attention of people paid to notice details without excuses or shortcuts remaining. I met her for lunch on Tuesday, not as an employee, not as a problem, but as a professional who suddenly had options again. The table felt neutral, which was new, because no one was measuring my value in quotas or titles anymore. She smiled and said, "We've been wondering when you'd be free." I understood exactly what that meant. They had watched the chaos unfold quietly, fielding calls I used to handle, reading tickets that made no sense without context. They didn't ask if I could help. They asked when. They needed someone who understood the system end to end, not just how to sell around it. Someone who had built it under pressure and kept it alive. I listened, relaxed, while the leverage finally shifted in my favor. The number came next, delivered without drama, high enough to feel unreal and reasonable at the same time. It was several times what I had been earning. Paid hourly, billed transparently. No performance theater, no loyalty speeches, no threats disguised as leadership. They spoke about boundaries, notice periods, and mutual respect like those things mattered. I didn't negotiate aggressively. I didn't need to. Freedom has a way of simplifying decisions when dignity is restored, and time finally belongs to you. I signed the contract later that day, quietly, electronically, without telling anyone who didn't need to know. There was no announcement, no celebration, no victory lap, just a calm certainty that I no longer belonged to uncertainty. I thanked them for lunch and walked out lighter than I had in years. My silence wasn't secrecy, it was control. For the first time. My future moved at my pace alone freely. The irony arrived gently and stayed. The vendor that once supported my old company now employed me. I would return to the same systems, the same workflows, the same problems. Only this time, every hour had a price, and every boundary was respected. I wasn't coming back to save anyone, I was coming back as a partner. Freedom didn't look dramatic, it looked sustainable, quiet, and entirely mine by design. I heard about the fallout secondhand, which made it cleaner. HR didn't raise voices, they documented. Mark was called into meetings that suddenly included people he never prepared for. Policy language replaced bravado. Authority thinned quietly. The reprimand came first, formal, recorded. He was reminded that unilateral ultimatums violated process and exposed the company during a merger. Then came the restructuring. Marketing was pulled from under him. Budgets halved. Approvals rerouted. The title stayed. But the power didn't. Watching a man keep his chair while losing influence is a precise kind of justice. Sales felt it next. Without my reporting layer, teams were forced to build their own numbers. Spreadsheets multiplied. Metrics conflicted. Forecasts slipped. Confidence evaporated. Deals stalled because no one trusted the data long enough to sign. Clients noticed hesitation. A few walked. The irony was sharp but deserved. Growth had depended on systems Mark dismissed as overhead. Now those same systems were unavailable, and no amount of pressure could replace understanding. Meetings stretched longer. Excuses grew louder. Results shrank. Then my name resurfaced, not inside the company, but beside invoices. The vendor assigned me to stabilize projects the company had lost momentum on. Same platforms, same workflows, different relationship. I wasn't restoring internal order. I was delivering contracted outcomes, billed hourly, scoped tightly. I attended calls as an external partner. Mark wasn't always invited. When he was, he spoke carefully. He had to. I answered questions with the calm distance of someone no longer accountable to his mood. Every solution had a price. Every delay had consequences measured in hours. That was the collapse. Not dramatic, not sudden, just authority draining away while work continued without him. The company paid more, moved slower, and lost trust it couldn't easily recover. I did the work he undervalued, on projects he mismanaged, with leverage he never saw coming. It ended exactly how systems failures always do, through patterns, not explosions. Teaching everyone watching that control is temporary. Documentation is permanent, and respect, once dismissed, returns only as an invoice no one argues with after the damage is already done. I learned about Mark's final exit months later, in the least dramatic way possible. I was in the middle of a routine workday, reviewing tickets, sipping lukewarm coffee, when an old colleague messaged me, "Did you hear Mark's gone?" No headline, no announcement, just that, by then. His punishment had already unfolded slowly. HR had kept him just long enough for policy to do its work. The merger clock ran out on him. No equity, no payout, The very reward he had used to divide people passed him by. Perfectly compliant and utterly unforgiving, the pressure followed. Without marketing under his control and without reliable reporting, his numbers slipped. Performance reviews turned cautious, then critical. Words like risk and instability began appearing next to his name. Clients hesitated. Executives stopped repeating his promises. Reputation doesn't collapse loudly. It erodes until no one defends you anymore. He stayed. Because leaving earlier would have meant admitting failure without compensation. So he endured. 12 months of scrutiny, 12 months of strained meetings and reduced influence. By the time the anniversary arrived, the role that once inflated his ego barely resembled authority when he finally resigned. It wasn't strategic, it was exhausted. The terms were harsh, a long notice period, restrictions that narrowed his options, no internal effort to retain him, no farewell tour. The company simply adjusted calendars and moved on. I absorbed all of this while closing out a contract, billing hours, and scheduling my next week. I didn't pause. I didn't celebrate. Satisfaction doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it settles quietly, the way balance does after a long imbalance. Mark paid in time, reputation, and opportunity. I gained freedom, stability, and distance. The symmetry felt complete, not because I had chased revenge, but because consequences finally aligned with behavior. And the system, once again, did exactly what it was designed to do. That ordinary afternoon confirmed something simple: patience outlasts arrogance, process outlives posturing, and when leverage is built quietly. The ending arrives without fireworks, only a calm sense that fairness has finally caught up to everyone watching closely at last. I work as a contractor now, and the difference is immediate. My calendar belongs to me. My rates are explicit. My value is measured in outcomes, not moods. I choose projects, set boundaries, and stop working when the work is done. No one confuses urgency with importance anymore, looking back. I don't feel anger. I feel clarity. I followed policy, respected process, and let systems respond exactly as designed. I didn't need speeches or threats. The structure handled it quietly, impartially, and permanently. Justice didn't need my voice. It needed my absence. What changed most wasn't my title, but my posture. I no longer shrink to fit unstable authority. I don't explain my worth to people invested in misunderstanding it. I simply deliver, invoice, and move on. Sometimes I pass the old dashboards. The workflow's still humming. They don't remember me. And that's fine. Systems aren't sentimental. They are honest. Freedom, I learned, isn't dramatic. It's sustainable. It's waking up without dread and ending the day without regret. I didn't burn anything down. I stepped aside and let reality finish the work. Turns out, quitting at the wrong time was only wrong for him. That lesson stayed with me always. This story taught me something practical before it taught me anything emotional. Power isn't always loud, and dignity doesn't need permission. Sometimes the most effective response isn't confrontation, but precision. Knowing the rules, respecting the process, and choosing the right moment can change outcomes more than anger ever could. That realization didn't make me harder. It made me calmer. The hardest part wasn't being pushed out. It was watching my work be dismissed while everyone still depended on it. That kind of disregard tests your self-respect. I learned that protecting your dignity doesn't always mean staying and proving yourself. Sometimes it means leaving cleanly and letting reality speak on your behalf. This wasn't about revenge. It was about fairness, about refusing to pass harm forward. I didn't destroy anything. I simply stopped holding things together for people who refused to see me. And in doing so, I made space for a healthier way of working and living. If you were in my position, what would you do? Would you fight, endure, or step aside at the right moment? And where are you listening from right now? If this story resonated, know that your engagement matters. One comment can spark a conversation someone else desperately needs. One like or share can help this story reach a person standing at their own crossroads. And one subscription from you helps keep stories like this alive, reminding people they're not alone and that quiet integrity still counts. This story was fully created and produced by our team. We do not copy or borrow content from any other channel. Thank you for staying with us and listening until the end.